Welcome to the Answers Yes podcast, where we interview some of the most interesting people that have said yes to opportunities in their life. We hope that through these stories, you can learn to create your own destiny by saying yes along the way. Join us as we explore the new series covering topics such as passion, integrity, and hard work. I'm your host, Jim Riley, and I hope you enjoy these interviews as much as I do. I believe that everyone has an important message worth hearing. On this week's episode, I get to interview Katarina Miltenberger. One of the things that I enjoy the most about this show is when I have the chance and opportunity to catch up with old friends that I've met along the way. Kat is no exception to that. I had the opportunity to meet her several years ago, and she is one of the best mixologists, craft spirit mixologists on the planet. And today's conversation will prove that to you. And what I love about her is that she has an incredible sense of self-awareness in what she's good at. She learned at a very early age through her father that one of her talents was to be in the kitchen, be behind the bar, mixing cocktails. And if the story's not enough, the fact that she works for now one of the largest selling vodka brands in the U.S., Titos Vodka, surpassing Smirnoff most recently. That kind of speaks volumes of the caliber of people in the company that she keeps. So please enjoy today's interview with Kat. Hello and welcome to the Answers Yes podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Happy after holidays. I hope everybody enjoyed the Christmas season, and now we're into 2020. We're all clicking off those goals and writing down our core values, and hopefully we've got an incredible year ahead of us. I know I'm very excited about it. I've got a really special guest on the line today. And I need to set the stage a little bit before I introduce this guest, because I know that my listeners are aware of some of my backgrounds, but maybe not all of them. I spent 9 years as the vice president of PR, marketing, events, sponsorship, and a whole bunch of other tasks at a company called Nolet Spirits, which was responsible for Ketel One Vodka. And within those years, we had launched the Apple Martini. We'd taken advantage of the Cosmo Martini that was very popular with shows like Sex and the City. And we had a great time around the world with Ketel One Vodka. I was involved with the craft culture as it launched, as we know it today. Places like Milk and Honey in New York City, as well as the emerging craft culture over in London. As a matter of fact, I worked with a number of publishers and my team at Ketel One with some of these great craft cocktails that we see today. Put them in books and launched a series of wonderful drinks back in the day, I'm talking 15, 20 years ago. And then I went on to launch my own tequila company, Azuña Tequila, where cocktails were a big foundation of that. And, mainly margaritas and fun things like that. But I have been involved in the craft cocktail world for many, many years, but nowhere at the level of this guest. And I'm really excited to introduce to you. I've got Kat Miltenberger on the phone, whom comes from Texas. Kat, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm really good, and sorry for that long intro, but a lot of people don't know that I was involved not only in Ketel One, but really in the craft cocktail side of those emerging brands before craft cocktail was even a thing, and I felt I needed to give a little justice as I start to brag about you in the next 30 minutes.
Well, that's absolutely fine, and the craft cocktail scene is still very strong, and it's made its headway all the way around the world, where we're seeing some amazing cocktails coming out of very wonderful countries like India. We're seeing a lot of cocktails coming out of South America. So that trend is still on trend.
Well, I love to hear that. Now, I've got to admit, when I was flying to Texas for some meetings, and one of those meetings was going to be with you. My sales rep had talked you up and down, and I got to meet you, and you're the best. And, I had a little bit of arrogance thinking, well, I know something about cocktails. I've met a few people. And we had a wonderful dinner the night before our formal meeting. I believe that you'd done the cocktail on the menu and enjoyed those drinks. And I thought, well, we'll see what she's got in store for me tomorrow. And we went to your local cocktail. Where were we at when you made those cocktails for us?
Yeah, I I've drawn a blank. Actually, I'm trying to think of which restaurant, because I've worked with so many regional and local and national accounts. So forgive me for not remembering.
I know that you have done so many, so I'm sorry to put you on the spot. Well, the bottom line is the following day we were working with one of your clients and our clients, and I got to say the dozen or so cocktails you put in front of me that day were by far some of the best that I've ever had in my life. And the crazy thing is you were on the fly, you had some key ingredients, but you were moving and creating some stuff that I was thoroughly impressed with. But, looking back at that, which is more impressive than the cocktails you made that day, is the fact that you've made a career out of this. You've made a business out of this. And that's really why I wanted to talk to you today, is about the business of cocktailing and where you're at. And with me setting the stage there, and I'm going to turn a little bit of this over to you, I would love to hear, and our audience would love to hear, because this is what I do with my guests, is can you tell me maybe your intro career, after you got out of school, or some of the early days of what you did to make a living, and how ultimately it got to where we're at today, being this craft specialist?
Well, I can tell you from an early age, and I'll make this brief, and I always give an homage to my father. My father was an amazing executive chef, right off the boat from Sicily. Broken English. He made a career. He was from traveling all the way up from Boston, New York, and then ultimately Houston, to the port of Houston, and then landed here in Dallas. So with that being said, I had a family mentor by osmosis, so to speak, and I would go with him on Saturdays to the restaurant where he was the executive chef, and I would just hang out with him in the kitchen, not really doing anything as a young child. And one day I asked him, I said, I would like to get a soda. And he said, I'm going to teach you how to make one. So making one was grabbing the soda gun, scooping ice into a plastic cup, as I recall, and making a soda. And so basically that's how I would say my feet got wet, so to speak. My career in bartending was a need, not necessarily a want. I had a friend who said, if you need to make some quick cash and you want to do this, this is the best way, the best route. And so I started bartending in my late 20s and started out as a beer tender, and never thought that it would really amount to anything. But my first weekend on 50-cent draft, I made an average of $225 a night in coin.
Wow.
And that kind of started it. And from there, I grew from a bartender. I worked the floor. I worked the door. I cocktailed, and realized that it was enjoyable. It was fun. I got to meet people. I got to listen to everything from their complaints to how amazing their jobs were, what they did. So it was a day-to-day experience, and it was always changing. At that time in 1994 is when I started. And in 2004 is when I started to see the craft experience coming to what we would consider a mainstream bar. And craft being, we've got, we're using higher end spirits now. And instead of using a call, we would use a premium, such as at the time, Kettle was the big brand, and then they brought in a new product from France called Grey Goose, and so on and so forth. And then that's how it really started for me. Was I started bringing in my own ingredients into the bar, and I had a bar manager that really didn't oppose it, but said, if you do it, it's on your own dime, and I did. And so I separated myself from other bartenders and started making craft mojitos and anything I could do with fresh fruit.
Yeah.
And that's how it really started. And then I was approached by Tanqueray to do a competition, and I did, and became most wanted bartender for Dallas and the state of Texas. And that just kind of launched me into being a little bit more serious about the craft. Never really thinking that, wow, I could make a career out of it. But in the 90s, I was making six figures very easily. I was the number one woman bartender in the city of Dallas. Unbeknownst to me, I never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
I just never saw myself that way. I was very humble about it and enjoyed it. And that's how my career path started.
Kat, can we stop for a second, because I know let's assume a number of my listeners aren't familiar with the term craft cocktails. Can you describe what craft cocktailing actually is? I know you just briefly touched on quality ingredients and things like that, because I remember my first exposure was in New York City, Manhattan, going into Milk and Honey, and all I knew is that I was going to have the best cocktail of my life. And I remember sitting there, which was a very, very small place. I think they had 3 or 4 booths, and enough room for maybe 8 more people to stand in the place, and that was it. But I remember sitting there for like 20 minutes waiting for 4 drinks, and the table next to me was really pissed about waiting. And I realized, hold on a second, the reason why we're waiting is because they're making one of the best cocktails I'm ever going to have. And I look over my shoulder, and the guy is chipping my ice off of a block of ice, and I realize this is something special. Can you describe in your words what craft is and why it is what it is today?
If you consider a pastry chef, we're probably the closest thing to a pastry chef. Everything is measured. Everything has balance. Everything has acid. Everything has to work into making something very special for you to experience with the liquor. You need to understand what liquors you're using or liqueurs you're using, what the flavors are, the notes that you're getting out of that. Even when the drink arrives to you, being able to smell, it's just like perfume. You've got a top note and mid note and a base note. It's more than just a highball. It is actually understanding the components in which you are putting them together to create that special experience. So whether it's handcrafted chipped ice, block ice, handcrafted simple, there are different measurements for simple syrups. There are different types of sugars to make a syrup, whether it's a demerara or you're using palm or coconut sugar. I mean, there are so many variables. It's just as when you hear the term liquid chef or a bar chef, that's what I think about when I think craft cocktail. It's taking the time to get the best ingredients, whether you're foraging for them, hand selecting your limes, hand selecting all of your citrus, your berries. That all goes into it. It's just not just going to a produce store and just grabbing whatever. It's actually taking the time to look at what you're purchasing, the quality, the type, if it's in season, whether it's out of season. There's a lot that goes into that space and a lot that goes into the thought process of making a cocktail.
Which, of course, also helps to justify the price that we see oftentimes associated with craft cocktail bars and cocktails themselves. But, as opposed to pulling off, a berry-flavored liqueur off the shelf made by a company that makes 40 different flavors, you're actually talking about buying those fresh fruits, muddling them down, creating your own simple syrup from hot water and sugar, and taking this thing all the way down to the scratch roots of what the drink's made of, correct?
Correct. I find, and I just recently did this for a client, we just did a whole series of cordials. And there was a request. We want a lime cordial. We want a strawberry cordial. We want raspberry cordial. We want a handcrafted limoncello. We want an orange cello. So they got all of these things, and it elevates